Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
It's our practice to go around and say our name. My name is Cass.
Grisha. Christian.
My name is Michael.
My name is Mark.
Jason.
Bob.
Jeff. My name is Jerry.
I'm Larry.
I'm Ed.
Andreas.
I'm Matthew.
My name is Stephen.
I'm Brad.
My name is Jim.
I'm Mike.
Ray.
Nick. I'm Richard.
Jack.
My name is Joe.
Jay.
Sam. We're blessed to have Walt Opie back with us today. Walt was introduced to insight meditation in 1993 at Spirit Rock and attended his first residential retreat there in 2005. He's a graduate of both the Spirit Rock Community Dharma Leaders Program and the Sati Center Buddhist Chaplaincy Program. A participant in the current Insight Meditation Society Teacher Training Program. He leads a monthly sitting group for people in recovery at the Oakland East Bay Meditation Center on the last Sunday of the month. Serves as a volunteer Buddhist facilitator at Solano State Prison in Vacaville, and is executive director of the Buddhist Pathways Prison Project, BP3. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Let me know if you can't hear me. I'll try to speak up a little bit. Good to see you all. I recognize a lot of faces here. I've been here a couple times before. I was very moved when I recently found out that Hal Hershey passed away. He was the one that invited me to be here today. So, and I just noticed on your Facebook page and another place that what had happened, and so I'm sorry to hear about that. And trying to think about what to talk about today. Thought about a lot of different topics. Went through the usual process. Came across this quote from Gil Fronsdale, who said, "Self is a form of agitation in the mind." Self is a form of agitation in the mind. That's so true, at least from my perspective. So I find that when I'm going to speak, the part that's difficult is the selfing, how will I be perceived? What should I say that's really going to impress everybody? These kind of things. So I'm in this teacher training, and as part of it, they have us sit with teachers. You attend retreats, and you're kind of a trainee and with the other teachers. And I recently did this with a teacher named Christina Feldman, who is, I think she's Canadian originally, lives in England. She doesn't come out here that often, but she's kind of, she's been called the granny of mindfulness. And she's kind of a short but powerhouse teacher who's been teaching almost as long as Joseph Goldstein and people like that, and can be kind of intimidating because she definitely knows what she wants. She was teaching the retreat that John Kabat-Zinn was on when he came up for the idea from MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's where she got the granny of mindfulness name, apparently. But anyway, she was saying, well, if you get nervous before you talk, that's extra, basically. She said that she stopped being nervous when she realized she was just sharing the Dharma that she loves. Like, if you can just remember, you're just sharing the Dharma that you love. So I will do my best to share the Dharma that I love with you this morning. One other thing that wasn't mentioned is that I have a piece in this book, so I always wanted to be a writer, and I finally am a published writer. I have 7 pages in this book, Still in the City, creating peace of mind in the midst of urban chaos. And J.D. Doyle, who was here, I think, recently, is also in this book. We'll share that. We both went through the community Dharma Leaders Training Program together.
What is the name again of the book?
The book is Still, comma, in the City. At one point, the publisher wanted to take out the comma, and we're like, no, it's just still in the city. They're not the same meaning. Still in the city. So this group's a great example of still in the city. Because it's a very urban, Sangha. And the subtitle, again, was Creating Peace of Mind in the Midst of Urban Chaos. Anyway, I live in Berkeley now. I lived in San Francisco off and on, and I first moved here in 1990. For some reason, I've been reflecting on this. So I grew up in a small town in Virginia, and decided I had to get out and see the rest of the world, and drove cross country by myself. I literally told my parents I was headed west. I had like a vehicle and just kind of put everything I owned in it and drove west by myself and visited people along the way. I went west via New Orleans for some reason. So I did it the strange route, not the traditional pioneer route. But then I had a friend who lived in the Haight and had a free couch at the time. So I ended up living on his couch for a couple months until I found an apartment. And I was just reflecting when we were meditating earlier, I never would have guessed in 1990 that I would somehow end up sitting in a place like this, and next to Buddha, about to speak to any group. And I thought that I would be a published author maybe, but not Still in the City, but some great novel that I was concocting in my mind. So it's just an interesting journey, and interesting to find myself at this place. So the topic that I've been talking about a lot is looking at impermanence. You've probably heard the story about Suzuki Roshi that's in Crooked Cucumber, that book, but David Chadwick's the author. He talks about how this was February 1968, he was sitting at Tassajara down south near Big Sur with about 50 black-robed fellow students, and before us was Suzuki Roshi, the founder of the first Zen Buddhist monastery in the Western Hemisphere. This is what he says. Not sure if that's true or not. But anyway, he says that Suzuki Roshi, after they'd sat, said, "Thank you very much," and then took a sip of water, cleared his throat, looked at the students and said, "Is there some question?" And people kind of thought about it, and then the author raises his hand or something, indicates he has a question. Suzuki Roshi says, yes. And he says, "Suzuki Roshi, I've been listening to your lectures for years, and I really love them, and they're very inspiring. And I know that what you're talking about is actually very clear and simple. But I must admit, I don't understand it. I love it. But I feel like I could listen to you for 1,000 years and still not get it. Could you just please put it in a nutshell? Can you reduce Buddhism to one phrase?" And of course, everyone laughed, and Suzuki Roshi laughed. What a ludicrous question. I don't think any of us expected him to answer it. He was not a man who you could pin down, and he didn't like to give his students something definite to cling to. He had often said not to have, quote, some idea of what Buddhism was, but he did answer. He looked at me and said, everything changes. Then he asked for another question. So I love that. He, if pressed, he just boils down to everything changes. And the Buddha, it's not exact, but somewhere I have a quote about, where did that go? Oh yeah, here it is. So the Buddha there was a point where a bhikkhu, a monk, asked the Buddha to teach him the Dharma in brief. There were multiple times. He had different answers at different times. But one time, he said, teaching the Dharma in brief, you should abandon desire for whatever is impermanent. Abandon desire for whatever is impermanent. And then what he clarified was that was the classic teaching on the 5 aggregates. You may have heard these, the 5. They kind of form everything that we tend to cling to or desire. And that's form, so that's the body, form. Feeling, more like feeling tone, we cling to pleasant, or we push away unpleasant, and we kind of gloss over neutral or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. That's the feeling tone. Perception, volitional formations, which is intention or plotting schemes would be part of that, and consciousness, all of which is impermanent, so there's nothing really to cling to. And we can desire it, but it only causes us suffering because it's so fleeting. So that list comes up again and again, the 5 aggregates. And really, one teacher I said that all the teachings, all the teachings boil down to one thing, which is don't cling to anything. Don't cling to anything. And of course, meanwhile, we're wired to cling. That's the crazy part. So that's why maybe they say the teachings go against the stream. That certainly goes against human nature. And I think we're wired to cling for our own survival, so that's interesting. And yet the Buddha is pointing to something else. Part of my story is I found out I was an alcoholic at the age of 21. So I found myself sober, and I believed I was an alcoholic. I found out my grandfather had been an alcoholic and other relatives, and I just knew that when I started drinking, I had no ability to stop on my own. It was very clear that it was probably going to kill me sooner rather than later. And so I was able to accept that, maybe it's good if I just don't drink anymore. But then it's like, well, now what do I do with myself? Because I was 21 years old, and my whole life was kind of geared around drinking, and in a social, part of my social life was around that. And so I had to kind of figure out how to be in the world without that particular crutch, I guess you could say. And it took me quite a while to find Buddhism. It was in 1993 that I mentioned in the bio that I'd read about Buddhism, and I was always interested in it, even in high school. But it wasn't until I met a real teacher, somebody took me to see Jack Kornfield. It's kind of interesting because I wanted to be studying art, and I met this woman who ran an art gallery in Berkeley, and I started sitting in her gallery on Saturdays for her, and just liked her aesthetic, and she had some great art that she would choose for her gallery. I liked her sort of stable of artists, And then one day she said, "You should come with me to hear Jack Cornfield at Spirit Rock." And it was like I'd never heard any of these words before. Like I didn't know what Spirit Rock was, didn't know who Jack Cornfield was. But I trusted her because I liked everything else she sort of introduced me to. And I went to hear Jack Cornfield, and what he said just really spoke to me at that time. And it was kind of like the Suzuki Roshi thing. I'm not sure, that story I read earlier, I'm not sure I even got it necessarily, like what was going on there. But I just knew it was something I wanted to come back to and hear again and again. So I went and I started dragging friends out there, and we would sit in the back, or we would even lay down on the floor in the back during the meditation part, I remember. And it wasn't until later I was going through a divorce, and I was in some suffering. I was living in San Francisco, and I realized I'd also think I'd been laid off from my job. Just different things were kind of falling apart, and I was thinking I should be happier than I am. I've stayed sober this whole time. I've been a good lad. I did what they told me to do, and yet I'm still miserable. What's going on? And so I finally, at some point it occurred to me, they keep talking about retreats when I hear Jack Cornfield speak. Maybe I should try one of these things. So it was 2005. I finally was in enough pain and suffering to try a retreat. I went on a 5-day men's retreat at Spirit Rock. They don't even have those anymore, but they did at the time, and it was probably good because it felt familiar. I grew up going to like boys' camps. I was a camp counselor. I was used to like groups of boys and men or whatever. So men's retreat worked for me at the time, and but what really happened was I saw the benefit of the practice. That I got some relief from the suffering I was in with this divorce I was going through. And I also had this classic insight that I was talking about, that don't cling to anything. And it occurred to me that the reason I'm suffering over this divorce is because I don't want it to be happening. I'm like mentally fighting it. I went to a couples counselor with this ex-person. And at the end of the session, I really liked him. He looked like Jeff Bridges. It was somewhere in San Francisco. He had like long hair, and he just kind of looked like a kindly Jeff Bridges kind of dude. And he looked at me. He looked at both of us, but I felt like he was more looking at me. And he said, "I find that couples often come to me 7 years too late." I swear that's what he said. It still doesn't even make sense because 7 years too late is long. But it was just, for me, he was telling me like, this ain't, you can keep coming to see me all you want. I'm not going to save this one. And in a way that was good. It was helped me let go. I was on that retreat, and then after the first retreat, I had been on a wait list to do the 10-day fall retreat with Jack Cornfield, which at the time seemed like quite an exciting thing to me. And I got in off the wait list, so I sat 2 retreats in a row, and it was on that second retreat that I really had some insights about this letting go, and that the clinging was what was causing the suffering, and also fighting impermanence. That we think that we think that these things are permanent that aren't necessarily permanent, and or that aren't permanent, because nothing, it's all a fleeting world. That's one thing I love in the Zen tradition. They call this the fleeting world. There's a great Dogen poem, maybe I'll throw in here. He says, "To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill." I love that. Moonlight reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill. And when you really kind of pull back, we really are here for such a short amount of time in the grand scheme of things. It's always nice to get that extra perspective. So I just saw that the more I let go, the less suffering I'd have around that divorce. It was just a good, I guess, training ground for me. And by the time we actually signed all the paperwork, it was at City Hall, downtown San Francisco, or building maybe next door to City Hall it was. And I just remember we had to do that together, came out, cordial hug, walked away. I went and listened to some live music in City Hall that day. This woman was playing guitar. Just remember, and it was kind of like, okay, life goes on. And it was just a valuable lesson that the less I cling, the less I have to suffer. And it may sound simple, but please go try it. Because, like I said, we are kind of wired to cling. We're also wired. There was a study. I didn't bring all the details, but there's a scientist who was studying rats. I feel sorry for the poor rats, but they gave some of the rats I think it was morphine, a morphine drip. I can't remember all the details right now. Let's see. But the key was they noticed that the rat, the brain of the rat, when he was wanting the morphine, it fired a much larger portion of a certain part of the brain than when he actually got the morphine and was enjoying it. Mm-hmm. And that was a very small, and it was very easily disrupted too. The pleasure that he actually was getting from the morphine was very, tentative, tenuous. But meanwhile, it was really the wanting. It was really what he discovered was our brains are really, what we're really wired for is the wanting part of it. Because that's what motivates us to get what we need to survive, or to procreate, or whatever it is, to keep this whole human thing churning, I guess. The engine that keeps it going is more of the wanting part. And that was helpful for me to realize, or just to hear that. And the Buddha was pointing to this as well, I think, in a lot of his teachings, because he said the Four Noble Truths, the second Noble Truth is about craving. And that's, to me, this is what that scientific study was pointing to. So, and the craving leads to the clinging. So we have to see the craving in order to not get caught by the clinging. It all happens, of course, just like that. I wanted to also just bring in a story that from the suttas. Here we go. That this has always been an interesting story to me. That the Buddha had two chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana. You may have heard of them. And if you see, I don't know if we have any here, but yeah, I think that would be them over there. So in a lot of Buddhist art, there's the Buddha, and then there's somebody to his left and to his right, the two other monks, and that's Sariputta and Moggallana, his two chief disciples. And so they were considered. Sariputta was considered second only to the Buddha in his depth and range of understanding of the Dharma, and his ability to teach the Dharma. And Moggallana was said to be foremost in psychic powers and second only to Sariputta in the wisdom and understanding. So they were, pretty highly revered monks. And there are lots of suttas in the Pali Canon. Assuming most of you know what I'm talking about, the old texts of Buddhism, where the story is just about Sariputta or Moggallana. The Buddha's not even in it, but they give, equally beautiful teachings. So about 6 months before the Buddha died, when he was 80 years old, Sariputta and Moggallana both died within a short amount of time from each other. And shortly after that, the Buddha spoke to a group. He was dwelling among the Vajjayans at Ukachela on the bank of the river Ganges, together with a huge group of monks. This was not long after Sariputta and Moggallana had attained final nibbana, which is how they called died. And on that occasion, the Blessed One was sitting in the open air among this crowd, and he kind of surveyed the crowd, and he addressed the bhikkhus thus. The bhikkhus are monks. Bhikkhus, this assembly appears to me empty now that Sariputta and Moggallana have attained final nibbana. This assembly was not empty for me earlier, and I had no concern for whatever quarter Sariputta and Moggallana were dwelling in. The arahats, the perfectly enlightened ones, who rose in the past, also had just such a supreme pair of disciples as I had in Sariputta and Moggallana. The arahants, the perfectly enlightened ones, who will arise in the future, will also have just such a supreme pair of disciples. It is wonderful, bhikkhus, on the part of the disciples. It is amazing on the part of the disciples that they will act in accordance with the teacher's instructions and comply with his admonitions, that they will be dear and agreeable to the four assemblies. The four assemblies are the monks and nuns and the male and the men and women of the lay people. These days we probably have more than four assemblies, but that's the ancient way they put it. It is wonderful, bhikkhus, on the part of the Tathagata. It is amazing that when such a pair of disciples has attained final nibbana, there is no sorrow or lamentation in the Tathagata, the Buddha. He called himself the Tathagata, the one who has gone thus, something like that. But I think it's interesting because he's saying he doesn't have sorrow or lamentation, but he still feels the loss. There's an emptiness there that wasn't there before, that he didn't feel until that his chief disciples were gone. I've always found this very moving because maybe part of me is looking for that, because I think it's a little too easy to just say, okay, now we're fully enlightened and we don't feel sorrow or lamentation, sadness, but that there is, I just find this a curious passage, that he did feel the emptiness of it. And admittedly, I was inspired by the loss of Hal, who I did not know well, but did meet and felt his kind heart for sure. But so I did want to just bring that in. I know that because we do want to honor people's loss, that there is something that we lose when each of us is gone. And I always wanted the Buddha to say more about that emptiness that he felt. But maybe, I don't know how much time I have. Let's see. So then the Buddha goes on. He says, how bhikkhus is it? Wait, is that the right part? Okay. How bhikkhus is it to be obtained here? What is born come to be conditioned and subject to disintegration, not disintegrate? There's another translation. So this is his teaching on impermanence. The other translation, how could it possibly be so that what is born, created, conditioned, and liable to fall apart should not fall apart? That is not possible. That is impossible. It is just as if the largest branches would break off a great tree standing possessed of heartwood. So too, bhikkhus, in the great bhikkhu sangha, standing possessed of heartwood, Sariputta and Moggallana have attained final nibbana. How, bhikkhus, is it to be obtained here? May what is born come to be conditioned and subject to disintegration, not disintegrate. That is impossible. So again, he's it's this understanding that everything's impermanent. We're all here only temporarily, and so this is just a fact of our existence. But then he also compares losing Sariputta and Moggallana to a tree possessed of heartwood, a great tree losing two of its biggest branches. So that's not a minor loss for the tree, I wouldn't think. So that's interesting too, that he includes that. And then he goes on and gives this advice. Therefore, bhikkhus, dwell with yourselves as your own island, with yourselves as your own refuge, with no other refuge. Dwell with the Dhamma as your island, with the Dhamma as your refuge, with no other refuge. And how does a bhikkhu dwell with himself as his own island, his own refuge, no other refuge? Here a bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. He dwells contemplating feelings in feelings, mind in mind, phenomena in phenomena. So he goes through the what's called usually today the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So he points us back to our own practice of mindfulness, to our own bodies, to our own thoughts, feelings, perceptions, all those things that are, back to just being present with whatever is arising in this moment. And those bhikkhus, either now or after I am gone, who dwell with themselves as their own island, with themselves as their own refuge, with no other refuge, it is these bhikkhus who will be for me topmost of those keen on the training. Basically, these will be the best of the best. I've seen another translation that this is really what we're practicing. That no matter what happens, we just keep coming back to being our own refuge and taking refuge in the Dharma, the teachings on things like impermanence, that there's nothing to cling to. We just keep letting go, even when it's painful, keep letting go. And keep, doing this with a sense of, I would say, self-compassion, that, it's not to say it's easy. He's not saying this is easy. He's just saying this is the way out of the suffering. And that, I just realized, that really has been my experience, is that I've been able to, when I've gone through difficult things, I've been able to use the practice. It kind of started with when I was going through that divorce and went on a couple of retreats, and I started seeing how it can give me relief. But then I've, of course, been through lots of other ups and downs in life since then, and I have been able to find refuge in this practice that we're talking about. And even these teachings like Gil Fronsdale, self as a form of agitation in the mind, have been helpful, because you start to see how this is all operating, and helps me let go. And my own father died of leukemia about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was at a Buddhist monastery. I was working at Spirit Rock. I used to work in basically the marketing department. We call it communications. And I was interviewing Ajahn Amaro, who some of you may know. He's a Buddhist monk. He used to be the co-abbot of Abhayagiri up in Redwood Valley, north of here. So I was up there to interview him, and he was about to go off to England to be the new head abbot at Amaravati Monastery over there. And so they made me I got there, and somebody told me it was going to be like this. I got there, and I said, and I'd prearranged it, and he said, come on up and you can interview me. And I got there, and I was like, great, I'm here, when can we do the interview, kind of thing. And he's like, oh, well, it couldn't possibly be today. I'm absolutely swamped. Hopefully we'll work it in tomorrow. And he was running around. He did have a lot to do, obviously, and so I was like, okay, well, I knew that it might be a couple days, so it settled in. The next day, I see him in the morning. He's like, well, today's not looking good. Maybe tomorrow looks better. So we didn't get to it that day, and then the next day I think I had to leave the following day, and he said, okay, I think we can do it at 10 o'clock this morning. So we finally all worked out. I interviewed him, had a beautiful interview. He's an amazing monk. He just was so present and like at ease in his body, and was a beautiful example of the practice. And the interview finished, and somebody came up and said, "You have you're to call home immediately. You have a family emergency." And my cell phone didn't at the time work at that place. No reception, so I had to use like a landline. And I didn't even know what home meant, because I had the home where I lived, but also had my parents' home, which I kind of suspected it was them, because anyway, I figured out it was my parents' house, and I called, and my dad answers the phone, and he said he had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, some form of leukemia, stage 4. They thought he had about 3 months to live, and when it was pretty. So then, at some point, we hung up, and it was obviously shocking. I knew he was having some blood tests, but I didn't expect it to be that serious. And anyway, but the teaching on impermanence really came up for me even then, and I went into the hall at Abhayagiri and sat in the back of the hall. I was kind of in some shock, so I couldn't really function that well, but I was sitting in the back of the hall, and all these people were giving Ajahn Amaro gifts, parting gifts, and just basically saying goodbye to him. And it was just an interesting thing, it's like all around us, all around me, and all around us, things are changing all the time. We often don't tune into it. But in that moment, it was very clear, and it just came. My father was going to die at some point, and this looks like this is going to be it. And there was a sense of, this is what's happening now, and it did help a lot. It didn't mean that I didn't go through a whole. He died 14 months later, so he ended up getting a lot of treatment. It helped for a while, and it was in a way a beautiful process, because it was pretty at least from my standpoint, I was pretty conscious for the whole thing and present and able to be with them, and kind of even near the end said, okay, is there anything we're leaving unsaid, anything that we need to talk about? And he said, he kind of thought about it for a minute. He said, no, I'm just proud of you. He gave me a hug, and that was the last real hug that he gave me, standing up. And I was really grateful that I was, I think the practice allowed me to be present enough to really have that moment with him. And so when he did die, I felt pretty complete in that, we worked, and this is somebody who I was basically at war with for my whole teen years and early 20s. So anyway, so the practice really did kind of hold me through that experience. And I wanted to mention, listened to an interview that Sharon Salzberg did with Tara Brach. These are big Buddhist teachers, if you haven't heard of them. And Sharon said, you may have heard of that acronym RAIN, R-A-I-N, which stands for recognize, accept or allow, investigate, and non-identify, usually. And Sharon said, I heard, and Tara Brock is particularly well known for spreading this one. She repeats it a lot in her books and stuff. And Sharon said, I heard that you've been reworked this one a little lately. And could you tell us about it or whatever? And Tara Brock said, yeah, well, the first three are basically the same. But I realized the last one, the non-identify, wasn't so helpful. And I changed it to nurture. And because first we have to nurture, bring in the compassion, self-compassion and compassion. The heart quality needs to be included. You can't just automatically non-identify. You have to allow the space for the heart. And then, once you've gotten to that place, then you can rest in the non-identification. But you have to get through the heart part first. So I thought that was a beautiful little shift of that teaching. Wanted to share with you. And then maybe I'll end with one last thing. I sat at a retreat just as what we call a yogi recently with Joseph Goldstein, who I'm in the teacher training with. Thought it would be interesting to just sit a retreat with him as a regular yogi. And he co-taught the retreat with Kamala Masters, who's a lesser known but really wonderful teacher. Lives in Hawaii most of the time on Maui. They have a retreat center on Maui. If you ever want to do a self-retreat, you can go there. I went there not too long ago. It's absolutely beautiful. It's up on the sort of mountain overlooking the rest of the island. It's pretty spectacular, and they have fresh mango groves and stuff. But she shared a teaching from U Pandita. He's a Burmese teacher, one of the great masters. He passed away, can't remember, maybe 10 years ago. And she said that he told her once the 3 most important things in practice. I love these kind of lists. Number 1 was continuity of mindfulness or awareness. So you hear this a lot, but it's worth remembering. And then number 2 is clarity, seeing clearly. So we have to have continuous mindfulness, but it can't be what I've heard called muddled mindfulness. It needs to be clear. We need to really be clear that I am being mindful in this moment. And I'm seeing clearly. I'm not caught in greed, aversion, delusion, some kind of colored glasses. And then the last one, though, is compassion. Holding others and ourselves with tenderness and care. So it's basically the same teaching from the rain. So continuity, clarity, and compassion. These are the 3 most important things in practice. And then lastly, I'll just end on Venerable Analayo, this German monk that I really valued his teachings. He says the practice can be boiled down to this phrase: keep calmly knowing change. Keep calmly knowing change. And then I guess in parentheses, and never cling to anything. So my parting words to you are: keep calmly knowing change and never cling to anything. Thank you. And I don't know if we have time for any questions.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free. Yes?
I wonder if I could ask you something about your prison practice. And I was wondering if sort of the approach to clinging and change might have a different character in that setting. It seems like change would not happen quite as quickly as it does out here, and that clinging might be a self-preservation kind of quality for people.
That's a great question. Yeah, I appreciate it. And I had thought of bringing a story or 2 in around that, but actually you'd be surprised. One thing is in prison people get moved around a lot, so they're not necessarily in one prison and they just stay there. Now that does happen too, but we have one prison. I go mainly to Solano We have two different groups. One on level 3, which is a higher, more maximum security, and one on level 2, which is lower, more like medium security, and people are close, can be closer to getting out on level 2. And level 2 has a good, solid group of 20 guys that show up every single Wednesday for our group, and they're really committed and practice hard. And then the people get out regularly, or they get transferred regularly, and new people arrive regularly, or people go up for parole and get denied, but they were really thinking they were going to get it this time. So there are a lot of ways in which they're constantly dealing with change. And also, people in the prison die. I haven't had anybody yet in our group die in prison, but I've seen people around them die pretty regularly, sometimes natural causes, sometimes not. But so it's not so different, really. There are things that, and the things that get clung to are just on a different scale in a way. Like one thing, you have to wear your, I just learned this recently, you have to wear your state-issued boots to the dining hall in prison, in this prison anyway. You can't wear sneakers, you can't wear any other shoes. Every time you go to the dining hall, for some reason, you have to have these specific boots on. I'm not even sure why. And there are guys that just really resent the heck out of that, and they're clinging to their kind of resentment of, this seems ridiculous, why do I have to do this? And yet, if they don't do it, it causes them trouble. So I appreciate the question. It's kind of, does that answer? I mean, I'm trying to think of the clinging. Yeah, if we have more time, I can go into it more. Right? That's the short answer. Yes.
Did you say that intention was one of the 5 aggregates?
Yes. Volitional formation, intention. Yeah.
Interesting, because I was listening to a podcast with Oprah and Brene Brown, and they were talking. Oprah was talking all about how she set an intention and she achieved that. So it was just kind of an interesting juxtaposition that the Buddha is saying, don't have that, don't set intention.
Well, he's just saying it's impermanent and don't cling to it.
Yeah.
But he's not saying, yeah, but no, you can have wholesome intention, and that's perfectly wonderful to do. It's more just that, well, intention is, of course, what causes good or bad karma, wholesome or unwholesome karma is our intention. We could cut somebody with a knife, and it could be a surgeon who's there to heal them, or it could be somebody who's trying to harm them. So it's all about the intention. So yeah, but thank you. I get it. Right. That's a big topic worth delving into further another day. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Okay. I've just been thinking lately about forgiveness, and frankly, specifically around public leadership. And I don't want to get into all that, but I just want to know, I was trying to understand, reflect back on how the Dharma speaks to that concept, forgiveness. I mean, I know about loving kindness and about other things, but what is it? I often don't hear the word forgiveness used in the Sri Dharma. So,
Yeah.
what do you reflect on that?
Right, that's a great, it's interesting, it's not used very often. Like if you read the Pali Canon, they don't really talk about forgiveness per se. There's sort of a making amends. In other words, if we've, and it's important to admit our wrongs so that we don't repeat them. But there's not a lot of what we call forgiveness. I think it might be sort of a concept coming from a different place. Although you do hear in modern Buddhism, people do talk about the importance of forgiveness. So that's not to say, but in studying early Buddhism, which was one of my main areas of focus, the truth is there's not much on forgiveness itself. But one thing I heard recently from I won't name them, but a senior Dharma teacher was that their way of having compassion for, say, current leadership is that they are creating so much harm for themselves, if we believe the law of karma, that ultimately their actions are going to cause so much harm both for others and for themselves that we can have compassion for the fact that they're basically acting out of such a level of ignorance, of not understanding how much suffering they're going to cause even themselves, that there could be some compassion for them from that angle. That may or may not be helpful, but I thought it was interesting. Last thing I'll say is one thing that in that realm that helped me was hearing Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's a very senior monk, say that, it is okay, and not only okay, but important to have a sense of moral outrage at times. It's not based on politics per se, but just on, whether things are, when we see harm being done, it's appropriate to have moral outrage about that harm being done. And important to act in ways that we can to prevent ongoing harm. So that I found that empowering in a way, because it gives me permission to have not self-righteous anger, but moral outrage. So that's another big topic. But thank you, I appreciate that question.
One last question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting. And always an important reminder. In personal relationships, even, the phenomenon of not seeing someone you loved once for 50 years and then jumping into each other's arms and being right there. Where is that maintained? That's this heart connection, which is, it is an attachment. I would mourn if they died. Yet it has not been something that drives my life. It's just connections are real, and I'm prepared to accept that suffering is the price of attachment to people I love, because that's just the way it is. And I don't really know how I'm going to redesign my heart in the next 20 years to stop having attachments to people I love. And that's okay. Suffering is actually not the end of the world of that nature. Seeing them suffer is horrible. But you see what I mean? There's just a certain amount of, if you're connected in your life, you're gonna suffer if they suffer, or if you lose them. Am I just being dim? It just seems like unavoidable. So that when Buddhism says this practice will eliminate suffering, I don't see it. It might eliminate mental bullshit, but not the suffering that comes from life connection.
I wouldn't want to disagree.
I don't mean to, I'm not protesting, but it's I can see that there are degrees of attachment, and it can move into unhealthy, and there can be addictions, but that's not what I'm talking about.
But yeah,
Like the Buddha, I'm missing his powers. They were always there, and now they're gone. And
that's why I think that story's so
yes, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Poignant, because he's not saying. He's acknowledging he loved those two guys. I feel like that was his way of acknowledging, hey, the world is an emptier place without those two guys. Mm-hmm. And he died 6 months later, and he wasn't fighting it at that point. He was. So I hear you. This is our connections with others is what gives life the real juice and meaning. So there's a bit of a. That's why I brought in that teaching. Not that just as something to contemplate. That I love that the Buddha said, the world's a little emptier today without those two guys. So acknowledging it, and also the thing about the tree, it's like this great tree has lost two of its most important branches. So that's, to me, his way of acknowledging it. But he's saying he's not suffering because he understood that it was never permanent, that it was always, there's the 5 recollections that none of us gets out of here alive. We're all of the nature to be born and die. We can, for me, like those moments with my father were very sweet and precious, knowing how impermanent it all really was in that moment. In a way, heightened it. When he died, I grieved, but I also was able to let go because I kind of was there when I could be, and just let it go. But now I'm also a father myself, and now I understand even better how all this is easier, is very powerful, these connections. So I hear you. And there are, and what's even interesting is my daughter, she's met a lot of little kids, right? And we've put her together in different play groups and whatever, and there's one little girl that she's completely bonded with, and that means something to her, and she wants to be with that one little girl. And other kids are kind of like, eh. But, you put her in that room with that one little girl, and it's just like, they can't get enough of each other. And where did that come from? I don't know. It's like, it's kind of mysterious. Because it's not, we didn't plan that. So who knows? I do think that there's mystery. I also like to just leave hey, we don't know all of what's happening here. So the mystery remains. Anyway, thank you. It's lovely to be here with you.
Thank you.
I guess we're done.
Next week, John Martin will be our Dharma speaker. He leads an ongoing weekly Monday evening meditation group in the Castro, and is the co-guiding teacher for the LGBT queer Sangha at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City. He's the hospice volunteer for many years with Shanti Project and the Zen Hospice Report. Do we have a host today?
Yes, we do. My name is Jay. Pleased to be your host today. There are refreshments outside for you to enjoy eating. If you have tea, there's plenty of space in the top rack of the dishwasher. Just put your cup there and your tea bag in the compost. If you want to continue eating after we break up, people who go to lunch together meet at the front door at about 12:30. I will be walking around with the Dharma bowl, and I want to say that I've been coming here for more than 9 years, and today is the first time I ever saw a breakdown of our monthly expenses. This is where your generosity, your dana, goes. We ask for a contribution of $10 to $20. If you can't afford that, please know that you continue to be welcome here, regardless of your ability to pay. We want everyone to enjoy our fellowship. And one ongoing way that we do receive funds is through donations to Community Thrift Store. If you give anything there, if you have anything at home that does not spark joy in your life any longer, please consider going to the Community Thrift Store, naming GBF as the recipient, and those checks come in quarterly to us from Community Thrift. It's an excellent, a pretty painless way to give if you like to.
And make sure you look at the website, what they take. They don't take bed linens. There's certain things that...
Carpets, you know.
Yeah, right.
Vibrators.
Used underwear.
Any other announcements? Yes, Richard.
Yes, I just want to remind everyone GVF's annual retreat is October 11th through 13th at Vajrapani. Tripwile is our Dharma teacher. There's still space. I think there's some flyers out on the, I guess you'd call it the coffee table, or whatever, the table in front of us over. So if you have any questions, you can talk to me or Jerry. We're sort of in charge of doing that. And please consider coming.
I'd just like to mention one of the things that the Dharma goes to support is the newsletter, which goes largely to incarcerated populations. So that's one way that we can be of service to people who don't have a lot of resources available to them. Yes?
And let's add that the other thing that we do out of generosity is the Larkin Street lunches, dinners, which are very much appreciated, has been going on for a very long time. And that is another thing that Dharma supports.
So can we gather for the dedication of merit?
Would you? So by the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.